Thank you for keeping it right here on Sunrise at Sea, and you're just in time for Twitter Jabs Part 2, where we are discussing the reopening of the Rwanda-Uganda border. Of course, that is Katuna border that finally reopened as of yesterday. We are pretty much excited because we can finally go for enjoyment, but however, not everyone is allowed to access the border points as yet. By joining me at the center of this conversation is none other than Dr. Rogers Barigayomi, right? I hope I got that right. He is a directorate in the management. He has a directorate, I beg your pardon, in management science and political studies and law. He also has 2 master's degrees, one in law and the other in international human rights. He is also very passionate about mentoring youth and has mentored several youth in businesses and career development at all levels of education. He's also very passionate about service to humanity as a professional and also as a senior Rotarian. He has traveled widely to serve humanity and has served as head of faculty at the Department of Kampala International University and is also a director at Tabken Consult. He's also the chairman of the Labour Party Uganda. Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Siobhan, for having me here.
Yes, exciting. So today we're going to be looking at the reopening of the Uganda-Rwanda border. And the first question that I want to pose to you is looking at the fact that we are just both recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, both Uganda and Rwanda. Would you say that the timing is right?
Yeah, I think the timing is right. That because we need a big shift in the economy to kickstart. And for our brothers, especially many of us, Rwanda, I think, is the closest country in relationship, not in business. Kenya is the biggest in business partner, but in relationship to Uganda, it's Rwanda. So it was good that these borders be open. And of course, for the people who like the nightlife, I hear there are people who associated from Rwanda with the nightlife. So I think, Shivan, you could be one of them. I think I'm out of that age bracket, but I think it is timely that the Rwanda border is open.
Okay. Now, looking at the aspect in relation to trade, and I was actually trying to read up on the statistics, and it showed that, for instance, the value of Rwanda's imports from Uganda stood at $59.6 million in the third quarter, that was of 2019, and declined drastically to as low as $10,000 that was last year. So what does this mean for trade now that borders have finally been reopened?
Yeah, it's good for our trade, and especially for people who have been growing food crops around, the farmers. It will help to increase their income, and many of them have been struggling to take their children at school. The economy has been slow, so it will boost the trade. Yeah, because and both for Rwanda and Uganda, because also Rwanda has been dependent on many of the Ugandan products, and of course the biggest, fastest border posts has been through Mombasa through Kampala. So it is good for both countries to have these borders open.
But even while we're excited, not everyone has been allowed access. You are talking about the fact that I look like someone who might be enjoying the nightlife, but not everyone has been allowed to, to be able to cross the different border points, because the people that have been allowed are only trucks and government officials and also nationals, depending on the situation that you're going to, if you're actually critically in need of crossing over to the border. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's expected that it will kickstart slowly, because I watched the news yesterday and people, even it got everyone by surprise.
Yes,
and even the customs officers seem to be surprised. They don't know what extent. In the East African protocol, trade economic protocol, where we both signed to keep these borders open, and actually it is sort of an injustice, but what happens is, the politics and diplomacy have been playing. But what is likely to happen is that they will open slowly by slowly. Then, as of course, the politics also has to come in, because Rwanda is going to watch and see how Uganda is, because there are terms of them, and the problem here, we don't know the terms, because it was between persons. It was not so open to the public. So until those terms which Rwanda said have to be met by Uganda are met, and casually, because remember, I used to tell people this problem is more between President Kagame and President Museveni. They know the details. They've never brought them back. I don't believe, Shivan, you have problems with Rwanda. Many Ugandans don't know about actually what problem we have with, but they are sort of, I would say, political, military engagements. And so, until some of those terms are met by Uganda, then we'll see Rwanda open fully. But I want to take you back to the fact that this problem of Uganda and Rwanda border dates several years from 1959, when many Rwandese came to Uganda. And still, every 30 years, it reoccurs. In 1990, many Rwandese again crossed back to Rwanda from Uganda.
Yes.
And they, of course, went to engage it was a military sort of fight. But I remember I was a child, Shivan, and I was about 15. And at that time, my father used to happen to be the district, they used to call them SDS, Special District Administrator. So he was in control of Kabale district. And they met with the Prophet of Byumba, which is a neighboring country, and the two presidents met to start, because they've been tension. I'll tell you, these tensions have been there. And when the two presidents met, there was an agreement to have some kind of transportation. And when that transportation started, many of the Tutsi who were in Rwanda, in Uganda, used it to actually go and invade Rwanda, and that's how Habyarimana was toppled. So it is historical that these people know, even if now the present regime came from Uganda, they know the history that these borders can cause a regime change. Actually, the two presidents seem to be nervous, knowing that the opening of the border can easily cause a regime change to any of them. Rwanda can cause I seem to see that in the picture, that it can cause a regime change in Uganda or Rwanda if they are not handled carefully.
But regardless of the different, because in your opinion, you're looking at political insecurities, you're looking at political differences between the two countries. Should Ugandans be paying for that? I mean, we have so much at stake to lose in regard to trade.
Yeah, you see, in politics, the big boys matter more than, because, for example, the citizens, and I will tell you, for the citizens, many traders and many trades have stagnated. But you know, they say the interests of the big boys and the people in governance and in leadership, they are less sensitive to the smaller traders. But indeed, many traders have lost out. Businesses even have closed. If you see, like Kabale town, if you see Katuna Border used to be lucrative, but the last time I checked, the businesses had gone down, and even people had abandoned the businesses. So, but people won't look at that. They look at the interests, like, of the government, the interest of the for example, the presidents, I think, at the stake.
As a political analyst, do you think that some of these issues that are happening between Uganda and Rwanda have fully been resolved, and that we should not expect another closure of borders happening? They're
not fully resolved, and they, like I gave you a history coming from 30 years.
Yes, 30 years
and
ago.
They will never actually be resolved. It is to an extent, and to me, as I will give a solution later, but let me show you why it is going to take some time for these issues to be resolved. Many of the officers who Rwanda was complaining about, and even who have recently been transferred, are Rwandese, of Rwandese origin. So these officers are still in the Ugandan, serving Ugandan, but some of them are Tutsis.
Yes.
And we have many of our Ugandans in Rwanda. So long as they are Rwandese in Uganda and they are citizens, it will always be a complication. Because, you know, when the RPF left, it came from NRM, which is like UPDF.
Yeah.
So they are sometimes one and the same. But again, they gather intelligence, counter-intelligence on each other. So those tensions that people who desert from Rwanda, many of them run to Uganda. And the ones who retire from Uganda or desert to Uganda run to Rwanda. And they were one, and at one time they cooperated. So long as those people still exist, and I say, for example, so long as President Kagame is still president of Rwanda and President Museveni is still president of Uganda, you know, in political science we call it a big man syndrome. They are all big people, and you know, they've both ruled for over 20 years with a strong arm. I won't say they are dictators, but someone can term them like that. But so long as these two factors exist, there will be some level of tension. Because, for example, you all know that President Kagame served under President Museveni.
Yeah. So
there is a way when someone serves under you. That's why actually we got some breakthrough, because when the son of the president went, it is more or less like he goes with a bigger broken heart towards Kagame, because Kagame now seems more senior. But to President Museveni, Kagame will always be a junior to him. So that alone causes tension. Yeah, he served under his army and he would salute him. So there is that thing of like, I mentored you. I think it's natural. So long as the two exist, there will always be that tension.
Dr. Rogers, looking at the aspect of conflict of interest, and you know, the different things that you have actually pointed out, in your opinion, how best do you think this issue should be resolved?
In my best opinion is, if the two, because good enough, the opportunities, they are both members of the East African community. And so long as they both leave their power, because somehow the East African community demands out of some of the protocols, things like opening the border. But as most of the problems we have around East Africa, because there are also some few tension between Uganda and Kenyan border. But as we all give in to the East African protocol and the East African treaties, and actually the political federation of East Africa, these small issues will become minor, because we'll start looking at ourselves as East Africans, and we'll look at the common goal of East Africa instead of looking at the individual goals. These two, most of the leaders in East Africa actually amaze me. They pretend to be pro-East Africa, but when you go to see, they have their interests, because if they know that the East African Federation would demand them to lose some of their, what I would call them, hegemonies. For example, if Uganda has no term limit, when we come to East Africa, there has to be some common playing ground. For all the East African countries.
Yes.
And many of them, though they confess, they fear to lose some of these privileges they've been having. So the biggest solution is to have the East African community and East African Federation. For us as the Labour Party, that's why Labour is a Labour Party, and it's across East Africa. I would ask you, what is NRM to a Rwandese or to a Kenyan? Nothing. What is ODM to a Ugandan? But Labour Party is in Uganda. It esteems labor issues in Uganda, and it can go to Kenya, it can go to Rwanda, it can go to Sudan. So for me, the advice I would say, let us open up the political federation and let's start talking terms which are favorable to all East African, and not be selfish and look at ourselves as Uganda, Rwanda. Because Rwanda is I told you, the sister country to Uganda. So to see tension, yet it is actually the same army. which liberated Uganda, and almost a subsection liberated Rwanda. So all those tensions will go away if we esteem the East African Federation.
So how much have we lost in terms of trade, and as far as the border has been closed for 3 years?
Oh, we've lost so much. In the figures, you gave the figures, but some of them are not
looking at the trade and the social aspect as well.
Exactly. Some of the things are not reflected even in the figures, because the social aspect, many, like the British did the borders, the Germans and the British, when they were dividing Rwanda and Uganda for their interest, they even divided families. There are some families where some of the households, you remember, like the African men who used to be polygamous, some of the wives are in Rwanda, some of the wives are in Uganda. So we are one. The colonialists carelessly made those boundaries, but we are one people. They are Rwandese. Like, for example, this Bafumbira from, so some have their relatives in Uganda and some have their relatives in Rwanda. So, and that's where we have the problem. Like, some of these people are in the military in Uganda, but they have relatives who are in the military in Rwanda. So the social aspect has affected the people and tormented them because they cannot see their relatives. I know of people in Uganda who could not attend traditional weddings and some of them actually are senior members of government. I, for one, I will tell you that there was an occasion between one of the senior government officials and that is genocide, but one of where he was, their in-laws were across the borders, and such occasions could be interfered with because we are one people. So the social aspect is even bigger than the economic aspect. And indeed, there are some of those relationships which should have taken place and they were resisted because of the closing of the borders. These borders are artificial borders. They should not hinder us as individuals.
So finally, as we wind up the conversation, what are your last remarks in regard to this particular issue?
My last remarks is that, one, let's sensitize the communities, but let the leaders of the East African right now it's a common market, take it a step ahead and make sure they fast track the East African Federation. And definitely they will have to give in to some of their powers. For if we are looking at ourselves as East African, now for example, Congo has been open.
Yes. What
situation do we have if now Congo and Uganda start closing? So if we are to look at the lens as East African, and all of us government officials are committed to look at ourselves as East African, then the tension between Uganda and Rwanda will be demystified. So look at East Africa, magnify East Africa, demystify the selfish kind of greed and looking at ourselves as individual countries. Then the problem will be solved.
Okay, Doctor, if I may, just one last one. For someone watching us this morning, what exactly do we need to do so that we do not return to that dark spot that we have just moved from?
What do we need to do as a government?
As a country, as Uganda?
Yeah, as Uganda, we need to operate more openly. And,
transparently?
Yeah, but it's like I'm telling you, the tension started with intelligence gathering. So I wish they could, because we also have one standby force which they were trying to build as East Africa. So they should try to have even one way of gathering intelligent information. They should reactivate that kind of standby force whereby, because as Uganda military officers, they will sometimes gather intelligence selfish on their side. And in Uganda it's common sometimes for capital gain. Then in Rwanda also it will be skewed towards protecting their boundaries. But now when they gather intelligence together, then it will remove tension, because that intelligence will be synchronized and looked at it as uniform than each one having different kind of information. And also foreign intervention in that kind of the foreign interest, because you know, especially the West has foreign interests which they can use to counter whichever country against the other. So there is need to get synchronized intelligence information.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rogers, for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Shivana.
And that winds up what we had for you this morning on the Twitter Jabs. I hope that you were able to pick a thing or two. Up next is Sarah Apollo, and she's teaching us on how best you can actually have your teeth replaced. She sits down with the dentist. Don't blink.